Well, she's back, everyone. The only person who's come back for a second time, my wonderful friend and colleague, Melissa Stevenson. Melissa is an LMFT in private practice in San Diego. We go way back working together, and just one of my absolutely favorite humans, and also just someone who I have so much respect and admiration for as a clinician and how she holds people. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. So Melissa, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, our conversation really did prompt a lot of people to reach out and ask me questions, and there was a lot that came from it. We talked about doom scrolling and so much more. So if you haven't watched the original episode with Melissa, I invite you to do that because I actually rewatched it. It is so good. I loved what you brought, and always just so grateful to be with you. So today we're going to dive in and talk about the power of attunement, what attunement is, and how it might be connected with, but also it's subtly different than always just validating someone's experience. What's the difference between true attunement and the power of presence? It's one of my favorite topics, so I'm grateful we're talking about it.
Me too. When we were talking about like, what are we going to talk about today? I have found myself having this conversation in so many sessions that I've been having recently, both individual sessions and couples sessions. So what comes up in couples therapy a lot
Mhm.
is this idea of like feelings aren't actually dangerous. And can we just leave space for someone to have their feelings without trying to rush in to fix them or make them go away or somehow try to squelch them? And the answer to that is always like, what is attunement? But that's I find it's a jargon word that a lot of people have a lot of misunderstandings about and not really a clear sense of how do I know that I'm doing it and where are the edges to it of where it stops being attunement and becomes into validation or into like, can't you just hurry up and get over this already so I can feel better?
Yeah, it's interesting as you're talking, I think perhaps the most pronounced example of this is what we often automatically or our programming might tell us to automatically say to someone who's just lost a loved one, right?
Oh,
I'm
yes.
so I'm so sorry for your loss, or God forbid they're in a better place, or even touching someone, or the message is don't cry. And it's so wild. I was thinking back to a client that I had years ago. It may have even been when we worked together, but it was
Mm.
there, but I don't know if it was in that era. And when he was, I think 11 or 12, his father died and he had two younger sisters. And he said, not one or two people, but it felt like a dozen people walked up to him and said, "You're the man of the family now. Be strong." I mean, this is an 11 or a 12-year-old kid. That is the opposite of what we're talking about, right?
The literal opposite, because I get it's coming from a good place. I think the other thing that I hear people say around death a lot is everything happens for a reason. And even if it were true, it is not actually helpful to the person having feelings. What we just communicated is like keep that to yourself, keep it behind a box because it's overwhelming. I feel like I'm saying it out of grace and kindness, but really what's happening if we really break it down and like slow the sequence down is I feel helpless
Yeah.
to make you feel better. And that anytime we touch helplessness, it is really, really viscerally challenging to hold. And so we will rely on these platitudes of everything happens for a reason. There's a silver lining. I'm so sorry for your loss. But it puts the person hearing it like in a box where they really have no way to be authentic with you because
Yeah.
you've communicated somehow the feeling itself, the feeling experience is too much.
Yeah, and we so often think we're supposed to say something. And I think, death is an interesting one that brings that up. As you said, like this idea of I don't know what to say, so I go to these platitudes. Like,
Hmm.
everything happens for a reason. I actually write about that in my first book. I'm very clear, like, no, it doesn't. Everything does not happen for a reason. Not in the way our mind wants to. Like, there's this sort of power that's, you know, causing this car accident so that I could learn something. Like, no, that's
Hmm.
not to me how the universe is organized. I create the meaning around the experience, and then that's what creates the reason for it. But to be truly present with someone in the midst of that, what would that look like? I think about your comment about couples work, because
Hmm.
having done couples therapy myself for a year with my husband, with the most phenomenal therapist ever, like so much of it was about learning to be fully present and open. And as skilled as I believed I was, I found these moments where I wanted to like either change or manipulate or speak to instead of just dropping in and really hearing him.
Yeah, so rather than rely on a bunch of words, like I didn't write this book, but I'm obsessed with this book. Someone gave this book to my son. And so we started reading it, and I find myself tearing up every single time, no matter how many times I've read it, because this is, if you want a definition, an example of what attunement actually is, it's this book. And if you can go on YouTube and listen to someone read it to you, for 5 minutes, it's beautiful. And how they showcase it is a bunch of animals come to this little boy who has had all of his blocks knocked down, and every animal represents a different kind of mentality. So, like the first one that comes is like the chicken who is well-meaning, like let's talk about it. Which is, I think what a lot of people associate therapy with is like, let's come in and talk about it. The problem is the little boy wasn't ready to talk yet.
Mm.
And so it was not the right sequence of timing of the opportunity for connection. So then the chicken gets frustrated and like ends up leaving. And then all these other characters come like, let's be mad about it. Let's laugh about it. Let's fix it and rebuild it just exactly how it was. Or let's knock down someone else's blocks and make ourselves feel better. All these characters come. And I think that is such an example of how we often are with each other. And the thing that's beautiful is eventually this rabbit comes and he just sits there.
Mm.
And I think that we, on as a whole, completely under recognize the importance of silence and just presence of being. And the thing that, if you're going to look at this book, what I encourage you to notice is the body language of the rabbit. It's not his body language, his ears, like how they actually illustrate this process. His body language says everything. It's, when the boy is sad, his ears are down, and he's like just cuddled up, and the boy's like, will you just stay with me? Don't leave. And the boy's not wanting him to say anything. It's just stay with me, don't leave. And then when the boy's getting animated and starting to go through his process, you see the bunny's ears and his body language just change and adapt. Like he's so present with every single part that the boy's saying without rushing him through it. And then at the end, the boy ends up getting through it and is going to like build something better than ever. And it's very hopeful, but it's, I think it takes the mystery out of like, what are we talking about?
That is so incredible. And I think about it in terms of like 85 to 90% of communication is nonverbal, and yet we think we're supposed to say something, right? Whether that's a loved one or if we are a clinician working with a client, we might think our job is to offer something or to even ask a question, right? Maybe it's not. I mean, yes, it is sometimes, but it's really about that presence. And I think we tend to think that 85 to 90% is body language, which part of it is, but really it's also energy, right? Like, what energy am I bringing? And that's something I know, Melissa, you and I have talked a lot about and worked with. What's required of me in order to be that field of presence is something that I often like to explore, because if I find myself, because when I was learning to be a conscious listener, I knew I was supposed to nod my head and have eye contact.
Hmm.
But I realized I was responding in my mind, and that's not body language. That's energy, right? And
Hmm.
we're energetic beings who feel that only
Hmm.
100% of the time, right? So how do I, or what's required of me to actually attune, not just sort of the buzzword, but true attunement? How do we do that?
I think it's such an interesting point. And I know the last time we talked, we spoke a lot about like somatic experiencing and bottom-up processing and, how do we work through feelings? How do we be with big charge in our body? And I think when I look at my own process in the beginning of doing that work, I would ask someone, what do you notice in your body right now?
Yeah.
And then they were like clearly going through an arc of a process. Like maybe they started where their breath was really shallow and they were clearly like tense. But then I could see them kind of go through this part where they like tear up and then they take a deep breath and then they have like a certain movement in their body. And in the beginning, I had this tendency to like, what's happening now? What's happening now? What's
Yeah.
happening now?
Yeah.
And because I was really curious, it was coming from a place of like, I am truly curious about what's happening for you. But now,
Mm.
with the experience that I have now, what I would do is I would just clock it and I would watch it and I would just be, I would be still. I would keep my breath really even. I would just make space for like that whole arc of whatever's going to happen. And then trust that there's going to be time at a later point to ask them, like, what did you notice in that sequence of what you were going through? What was that like for you? And to give them a chance to actually see themselves without needing to constantly narrate for me. I think that's distracting for people when they have to constantly narrate, even when it's positive energy coming from me.
Yeah. And what's
So,
important about this too is there's this discomfort for some people to be in that not knowing and to hold that space for someone. We use that term, it gets overused, but to truly hold space is to not interrupt even with a question or even as you said, like, what are you noticing? Because when someone can be in that field, that true attunement, they might then say, oh, something just shifted, or maybe as you said, they'll reflect later. But it's a really different dynamic. And I like to be provocative and say the only thing I really need to do for my client is my own healing. And all I mean by that, I mean, I don't even like to say the most important thing. I like to say it's really the only thing. Because if
mm,
I have a part of me that's uncomfortable with another person's pain or unknown or discomfort, I'm going to unconsciously or consciously interrupt that when I'm more comfortable being in my own process of not knowing, being in the question, being in the mystery, then I can provide that for another person. And to me, that's actual attunement that's really different than a lot of the ways clinicians have been trained, right? Like through motivational interviewing, ask the next question. Or as you said, I love your process because even with somatic experiencing, maybe I'm just going to ask, what are you noticing? I was hearkening back to my first therapist who I love, not my first therapist in recovery, Ken. He was amazing. He was an engaged Buddhist, but he would ask me where I felt it in my body, and I'd be like, what are you talking about? I didn't
hmm
even know what he meant. And then I would become
hmm
dysregulated by that question.
hmm I think that I'm so glad that you brought that up because that happens. I would say there's phases of therapy that I do and like clinicians that work for me in my practice that we do with people. And the beginning stage is always I ask a question of what do you notice? Where does that land in your body? Or, what do you notice about your body right now? And it's almost like, wait, I have a body. And then all the performance anxiety clicks in, right? Of, oh my gosh, I should know that this is a pop quiz. I should know the answer and I don't know the answer. And then I'm panicking and I want to make something up for you. And I have found myself also getting to the point where I start to inoculate that of, I don't actually expect that you know the answer to this right now. And the only way for your body to start putting those dots together is to have a chance to be asked it over and over again without any expectation that it has the answer yet.
Mm.
So we're just literally like laying groundwork, laying track for it. And at some point, it might start to know. So can we just ask the question without any kind of expectation that you would know the answer yet? And I have found that people really like soften with that because it gets us out of that school mentality of like, oh my gosh, I didn't study. I didn't know that we were going to have a pop quiz today and I'm failing. And, even my therapist is disappointed in me.
Oh, 100%. And I went right into shame. Exactly
Oh,
what you're
yeah.
talking about. So like it was so informational for me when I started doing this work, because I always remembered that experience. And I love you're going back to this book about the yeah, maybe the person's not ready. I mean, and I'm not, I think he was brilliant in the way he worked with me with it. And
Mhm.
at the same time, I mean, because obviously it was a significant moment for me because I still remember me not knowing the answer and like him saying, well, put your hand on your heart and take a breath and see what happens, right? He was so gentle with me and took me on a beautiful process. And that was just so much information for me. And it really did, in some ways, lay the groundwork for how I am with people. But going back to this, like, what's really required of me is to heal enough of myself, no finish line on healing, but be in my process enough where I'm not going to try to usually unconsciously manipulate the situation. And when we think about attunement, we hear a lot now. There's a lot being talked about on social media. Like people are getting their mental health and well-being from
Ooh,
TikTok. There's
yes.
nothing inherently wrong with that, but let's dive into that a little bit because, you're a narcissist. Remove yourself from toxicity, like all the things that are coming up now in social media. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And I think in a lot of ways, I'm happy that people have easier access to education around mental health. I think that that is lovely. And I think that's definitely an improvement. I think that where I personally feel terrified is I think we can forget that anybody can create content on a platform. They don't have to be qualified. And just because they're saying something and they're convincing and they're very charming doesn't mean that it's actually accurate and helpful for you. So I think that there's a difference between attunement and validation. There's also a difference between attunement and reassurance. And so I kind of want to talk about both of those things. So the difference between validation and attunement would be validation would sound like a woman is coming in to therapy with me. Let's say she's in an abusive relationship and she is finally seeing, I think I have a part that I'm playing in this abuse that I'm suffering. And I feel really sad about that. Validation would say, you're absolutely right. And it's a lot of strength to come to your own answer on that.
Mm.
If we just look at that, it's true. It is very validating of this insight that she's come up with. Is it helpful
Yeah,
in that moment? No. What's probably more helpful is attunement, which says, tell me more.
yeah,
That sounds like you're really creating some sort of space for yourself to really see yourself in a different way. What is this like to notice?
yeah,
Let's just make space for this like truth that's now like ringing. It's like literally vibrating in this space between us before I go in to like validate you for it. I think the difference between attunement and reassurance, I'll say early on in my career, I make this joke of if I knew before I went to school what therapy really meant, I would have never had the courage to do it.
correct.
Because what I thought therapy really meant essentially was I thought I was going to be really encouraging and reassuring to people. And I was just going to be this little ray of sunshine that was going to come into their life and they were going to leave me feeling great about themselves. That's a lot about me. It's nothing about them.
Yeah,
And what actually the point of all of this is for someone to come in and for me to be able to hold my own need to reassure them and to like make sure there's hope in the room. I've got to hold that. I've got to do my own healing on that like edge of like helplessness and hopelessness so that they can actually interact with whatever the thing is that they're uncovering and that they're touching inside themselves without my panic getting in the way. And it has been a lot of my own work to realize that, like a lot of ego strength to realize that if I jump into reassurance, which so with this woman, it would sound like, well, you've been through so much, and it just makes so much sense that you would end up in this position because of your childhood and, all these things that you didn't get or whatever, whatever. Is that really helpful for her in that moment? Probably not. That's much more about me of like, oh my gosh, I don't want to fall off the cliff here of hopelessness.
yeah. And let's go a little bit deeper into the why of that. I agree, obviously, wholeheartedly with everything you're saying. Why? Because someone, I think about it, obviously it happens in a therapeutic setting, but I also think about it with friends, right? A friend comes to me and shares something that's going on. Maybe my automatic response is to validate. Maybe my automatic response is to reassure. And I've kind of been programmed to think that that's what a friend, quote unquote, should do. And this is something that maybe someone watching or listening is like, wait a minute, oh my gosh, why change this? What's the why here?
I think that's a good question. I want to think about it a little bit. I think um, I'm going to put it in terms of my sons. My son is 5, and what's really interesting about talking to a 5-year-old about school is it's a lot like being with our friends in the sense that he's going to tell me a certain amount of information, and based on how I respond to him, depends on whether I get more information or not. And I think that I'm thinking of like a friend who's gone through a breakup and then is now talking to their ex again. And you're like, everything in you's like, are you kidding me? Like, this ex was so toxic for you. And like, we worked so hard to get you out of this relationship. What do you mean that you're talking to this person again? But as soon as you come with that kind of energy, and people tell me my face talks a lot. And so I don't actually have to say a word for my face to be like screaming. I can't like turn it off. I could have never done um, psychoanalytic therapy because I just am not a blank slate. I'm not flat like that. I think that's where this comes in of as soon as my judgment comes in, my fear comes in, my emotional reactivity comes in, that other person's going to read it and then they're going to censor what they're going to say. And so if I want them to censor what they're going to say, because I don't actually want to be in touch with those feelings, then yeah, like come out, be really authentic, and then you're going to get the reality of the relationship that you're looking for. But if you're interested in deeper connection, if you're interested in like really, truly, being with someone in a vulnerable, intimate way, there has to be a kind of constant grounding and self-soothing. I think one of the most effective things I've learned from somatic experiencing, there's been so many gems in there, but the idea that emotional experience is essentially a charge, it's a current that runs through our body and it activates our threat responses. And if I can recognize I'm in a threat response, then I have the opportunity to move charge through my body in a way that is very productive and doesn't hurt anyone, doesn't hurt me, and it helps me get into my right mind and my mature mind in a way where I can be with people in the way that I really want to be with them. But I have to be embodied enough to realize the opportunity when it presents itself.
Yeah, this is so powerful, right? Because then it allows that person to have the experience of letting that move through them, and I'm not there to interrupt that. And again, most of this in my experience is unconscious. It
Mhm.
happens from my own discomfort. And that's what I
100%.
discovered early in this work. It's like, oh, I'm really uncomfortable with this person going a direction and I might not know. I think about it, because I love doing group, and that's one thing I train on a lot is the dynamics of group facilitation, how it's similar and yet different to one-on-one. And in a group, I think people get afraid, people being the facilitator get afraid, I might lose control of this. And it takes so much inner strength and courage to allow something to be in the room and kind of help the group navigate that. And because group therapy is about them having a relationship with each other, it's not about me having the relationship with them. And I just remember early on being very aware of my own discomfort. And that was such an important part of my, I guess, learning and evolution is like, oh, like you said, like had I known everything that was going to transpire, I don't know if I would have signed up to do this work. And yet, it's the most rewarding work of my life, in part, if I'm fully transparent, because I've gotten to see myself more deeply. Because there's nothing like doing this work to like say, "Ooh, there's still that little place within me that wants to manipulate or fix or change the channel a little bit," right?
Yeah.
And it's usually,
Oh,
like I said,
yeah.
it's usually unconscious.
Oh, yeah. Peter Levine has a saying, who I didn't know until this last week. I was with my therapist and she said it to me, and I was like, that is one of the most poetic things I've ever heard. He has a saying where he says, help is on the way from places yet unknown.
Hmm.
And I think if we can latch on to that and like hold it like an anchor, I think that it absolutely shows up in the group format that you're talking about. Help is on the way from places yet unknown. Sometimes with a group, things take a turn and you're like, oh, I don't know where this is gonna go. But if you have faith in the group process, there is going to be something that comes that either like helps the group reflect on it or helps someone like deep down, like dig down into a deeper level. Individual therapy, there's things that might be a gesture, it might be a breath, it might be an insight. There's things on the way if we're open to viewing them, open to seeing what's available, and we're not so caught up in our emotional charge. Help is on the way from places yet unknown.
I love that. And as you were talking, it's unrelated to a degree, but I feel like I want to kind of bring it into the conversation. When you and I worked together, however, like a decade ago or whatever that was, I remember I was aware of NVC, nonviolent communication, which is like when you blank, I feel blank. And for a lot of people, that's a new formula that can be, especially with couples, instead of like
Mhm.
naming the feeling. But there was something that you and I explored, and for me, it was not a new concept, but a new practice, an embodied practice, and that is to not even add the first part, but just to be in the room, allowing myself to feel. And sometimes it's okay for me to name my emotional response, not even related to what the person is saying, but it is related. And the example that you and I explored was when someone is reporting something that I notice I have a wave of sadness, but they're not presenting as sad at all. Sometimes it's so effective, and it's more than just being effective, it's authentic to say, can we pause for a moment? I just notice I'm feeling sad. And there's something that's so powerful about that that's not about when you just said that, I noticed I felt sad because there's something there that's implying you just made me feel sad. But that's not what we're saying. And I think about that for couples, but I also think about that for friends because there's an interesting dynamic with our besties, right? We might be in a
Mhm.
pattern of like, oh, let me fix or let me offer my perspective. And maybe they're even pulling for that.
I think that's such a great point, and I think it's so intimate and what a perfect example of attunement to say like, "Whew, can we hold on just a second? I just got this wave of sadness."
Mhm.
And then, I like ground myself. I let that charge like move through, and then there's this space for us to explore that happened for me. What was going on for you?
Yeah.
Versus you said that and that just made me feel sad, and then we're into that intertangled, intertwined, codependent thing, especially if someone is having a hard time accessing their own feelings. There is probably that quality somewhere in their life where they've had to be responsible for things that aren't theirs, and then they're not able to engage in things that really are theirs. And so this moment that you're talking about is literally like how that gets to be separate but connected still. And that is also attunement. It's not just being quiet, like the book, the rabbit's quiet the whole time. It's body language is talking, but this is an example of actually using words in a way that's very, very present, owning my own experience and just holding space for you to have whatever experience you're having right
Yeah.
now. And I think our friends, we need that more than ever. I think people in my life know me. I have a soapbox about social media. In some ways, it's been great to give people access to information, like I said before, but in many ways, I think it's bringing out the worst of us. And I just want to remind everyone, fear is contagious. Shame is contagious. These things, they pop up on your news feed, and the tech companies have realized that fear drives engagement. Scarcity drives engagement. Rage drives engagement. So when it pops up in your on your phone, that might just be a 2-second short form video, but now it's in your nervous system, and what are you going to do about it? Because now you're contagious and it's going to pass on to whoever is around you. And I just think put down our phones, let's go have a conversation with friends, like be in the room with someone who has a nervous system. I think the other thing about attunement that I want to say regarding this is chatbots. So large language models, people are getting really attached to their chatbots. And the reason why is because it sounds like attunement. It sounds like all the words are right. But I just want to remind you like that bot doesn't have a nervous system. And there's something that's very seductive about like pouring all your secrets into this bot that's not going to judge you. And I think like I see it as a therapist of like people will tell their chatbots things that it's really hard to come into therapy and talk about. Most people, when they want to talk about sex for the first time in therapy, they say, this might be TMI, but dot, 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 dot. And I have to really stop them and say, there is no TMI in here. Like, what is this like to share this with me? I'm not uncomfortable. I've literally heard it all at this point, like bowel movements, sex fantasies. I mean, all of the things. If your therapist is getting squeamish about any of that stuff, you need to find a new therapist. It's not the right one for you. Um, but I do think it's easier to pour our heart and soul and all of our vulnerability into a chatbot that we think isn't going to judge us. But just a reminder that tech companies can do anything they want with that data. It's not actually private, and they're not actually looking out for your well-being.
And it's also not really healing what you think it might be healing.
Nope.
And there's two things, and as we move toward the end of the conversation, believe it or not, that I remember when we worked together. I don't know if you remember this, Melissa, but I used to take an old school boom box and put the song "Let's Talk About Sex," and I'd walk into the room, put it in
Hmm.
the middle floor, and hit play, and clients would
Hmm.
just like, "What?" I'm like, "Yes, for the
Hmm.
next 90 minutes, we're talking about sex. Get ready." And people would have all different degrees of comfort or discomfort around it because most humans, a very high percentage, are sexual beings, at least in some way. And
Hmm.
so, why are we not talking about that? There's so much shame around sex. It's just fascinating. Sex and money. And those are the things that we don't. And when I train clinicians, I say, if your program is not talking about sex, I want to invite you to ask whose discomfort it is, right?
Hmm.
Is it the
And
client? No, they're willing to talk about it if you give them a space.
I think that is also like a uniquely Western thing. I have a client from Sweden, and she's lived here in the States for a long time, but she remarks on in Sweden, it's not a big deal to talk about sex. It's like very normalized. And so coming here, she was like, whoa, like there's talk about the vibe, there's just a lot of energy around the taboo-ness of it. And that's probably a different conversation around colonization and religion and all that stuff. But I really, if you take nothing else away from this conversation, like it you need to have people in your life that you can have these real conversations with, like real people, real conversations, real intimacy, real risk taking. And I hope that we all find enough healing to be able to have the discernment to pick safe people for those things.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about American culture specifically is we're simultaneously not talking about it, but we're also hypersexuality and all of the like movies and social media. I mean, X now full nudity, right? I didn't
Mhm.
even know that. It's like, oh
Mm.
wow, I didn't even know that, right? So there's this interesting dichotomy of like we present it in some shameful way to not talk about it, and yet we're also exposed at a very early age, especially kids in this
Mhm.
next generation and the
Mhm.
generation growing up now. So we could do a whole show on that. I wanted to
Mhm.
close out with a question for you about attuning with self. Because when we were talking about that, like checking in with our own, like what am I experiencing and what am I noticing? There's also a self-attunement. And I'm wondering, I know that's kind of a big question for our last question, but what's that look like for you? And how do we actually check in with ourselves and have that attunement internally?
Just a little last question
Yeah,
on the
of
thing.
course, Melissa.
Um,
You can count on me.
yeah, to call myself out, what I've realized about myself is that I'm a worker. Like it is not in my nature to think about like, oh, I'm going to take a vacation. I'm going to take days off. I always, as a therapist, work during the holidays, and I see it as like kind of like people's hardest time of year. So I'm going to show up for that. But I think part of that is a long history of self-abandonment of like
Mm.
when I'm working and being there for other people, I'm not really thinking about myself in that same way. And so, as I'm embarking on these different stages of healing inside myself, I notice that I have more time in my car where I'm not listening to podcasts and music and trainings and all the things that I would normally like want to squish in there to like every moment. I've set timers on my phone for things like Instagram. it's hard because I do like some of the content on there, and I don't need to be on there more than 15 minutes a day.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't be on there at all. But like in the time that I would have outside of that and outside of like people, I don't work Wednesdays because there's a chance for me to actually be by myself in a way that's not busy and not productive. And I find that I can actually sit with myself and understand myself in a way that I haven't had access to because I've made myself so busy.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
so
beautiful.
I mean, I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah, and I think about the other thing I think of is I remember waking up one day and hearing the term spiritual practice. I'm like, oh, practice. What are we practicing for? Because, like mindfulness, meditation, quiet time, that is not only about that moment, it's practicing how to be with myself, how to observe myself, how to honor all parts of self, how to allow myself to feel whatever I'm feeling without attaching a story to it. And then I
Mhm.
can be that way more in the world. And certainly in these conversations we're talking about with our best friend, with our partner, with a client, if we do this work, how can I become more attuned with my own body, my own spirit, my own essence? And that is a whole other process that I think is at the essence, it's really at the root of what we're talking about. So,
It's at the root. And oftentimes, like if I can be with myself in an effective way, at this point, I'm a fully grown adult, right? Whatever wounding that I had in my childhood and early on, yeah, maybe it would have been nice for a competent adult to be able to be there in the way that I needed them to in that moment. And I'm a fully grown adult now. I get to be my own competent adult at this point, and I get to build trust in my own self in being able to show up for that younger version of me that's like scared or hurt or lonely or whatever the thing is. And I think that's really empowering, but it requires space. And when I take that space, I find that I need things differently from other people because I'm doing the work for myself that I think before I would have outsourced to other people to try to do for me. And then that is a bottomless pit. Like it is a recipe for disappointment and loneliness and putting so much pressure on my relationships that it's hard for them to be successful. And so I find it to be very empowering. It is definitely a practice. Like if left to my own devices, I default back to this way that I've lived for most of my life, but it feels very healing. It feels like I have like more skin around me to like contain myself now that I'm doing some of this for myself. And quiet time, I think, is a really, really big part of it. No phone, no internet, just me. I like me. Turns out I'm a good time.
isn't that amazing? Who would have ever guessed? Well, my gosh, Melissa, I have loved this conversation. I feel like we could just keep talking for hours. I adore you. I love you. I appreciate who you are in the world and the
Mm.
profound work you're doing. And also just, have so much respect for your point of view and your willingness to be in the process and articulate it in a way that I think someone watching and listening will be able to get something from it. And so that's my segue to all of you who are watching or listening. If you did get something from this, please share this episode. Please comment, please like and subscribe. It really does make a difference because the dedication of the Element Q podcast is to provide a space to talk about deeper healing within the LGBTQ community and beyond. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Melissa Stevenson, once again. Peace and blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.